Section 4 of Psychology, the Cognitive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Les Langston. Psychology, the Cognitive Powers, by James McCosh. Book First, The Simple Cognitive or Presentative Powers, Sense Perception, Part 2. Sensation and Perception. It may be noticed that in all our knowledge through the senses there is another element, and that is feeling of some kind. When we know our hand, we may know it in a pleasant or unpleasant state. We may and we ought to distinguish between the two. We call the one perception and the other sensation. These always go together. There is never a sensation without a perception, say, a perception of our organism or of an object affecting it. On the other hand, there is never a perception without a sensation of some kind, strong or faint, pleasant, painful, or indifferent. The sensation seems to be a mental affection or feeling of an organic state. These two, the perception and sensation, have by no means the same intensity. It very often happens that when the perception is strong, the sensation is weak, and vice versa. When the sensation is powerful, the perception may all but disappear. Thus, in listening to an instructive speaker, our attention may be fixed on his words, of which we wish to ascertain the meaning. Whereas in listening to our music, our soul may be exclusively occupied with the rich sounds. There is a sense in which the two are in the inverse order, the one of the other. If the feeling is very strong, the object may be very much lost sight of. On the other hand, we may be so absorbed with the contemplation as scarcely to notice the associated sensation. The soldier eagerly engaged in the fight with the enemy in front of him does not for a time feel the wound with which he is pierced. In gazing at a historical painting, we may be so interested in the incident as not to notice the coloring. Whereas in looking at a flower painting, we so enjoy the rich hues as never to notice the disposition of the flowers. This fact is an illustration of a more general law of our nature, that when we fix our attention on one part of a concrete or complex phenomenon presented, the other parts become dim and may in the end very much vanish from the view. Original and acquired perceptions. We have seen that man must have original perceptions. Such are those of savors by the taste, of odors by the nostrils, of sounds by the ear, of a colored surface by the eye, and of resistance by the muscular sense. Unless we get these by an original inlet, we can never acquire them by any derivative process. A man born blind cannot form any understanding or idea of color. It is Locke who tells us of the blind man who, on being asked what idea he had of the color of scarlet, replied that he thought it to be like the sound of a trumpet. But then, by combining our experiences and by reasoning from them, we can add indefinitely to our knowledge. Thus it is believed that originally human beings cannot estimate distance by sight, and yet it is mainly by this sense that the mature man is able to tell the distance of objects from one another and from himself. He has acquired a knowledge of nearness or remoteness by the muscular sense, say by the hand pressing along a surface. But now he is able by the eye, discerning the shade of color or the apparent size, to determine the distance of an object. In this acquired knowledge, there is first an accumulation of experiences, and then an argument founded on them. we shall show that it is by drawing the distinction between our original and acquired perceptions that we are able to account for the apparent deception of the senses. Our original perceptions never deceive us, but in the haste of observation and the rapidity of reasoning, we may pronounce erroneous judgments on our acquired perceptions. Section 4. The Senses. General Remarks. I begin my exposition of these by one or two remarks bearing on them all. The sensation and the perception of the sensation have their seat not in the organs of sense so-called, or in the nerves attached to them, but in the brain. The palate, the nostrils, the ear, the touch, the eye might all be affected in a regular manner, but there would be no taste, smell, hearing, feeling, nor seeing, unless the action went up to the cerebrum. Attempts have been made to give a separate place to each of the senses in the brain. I deem it proper, without committing myself, to give the views on this subject of Professor Ferrier of London, who has localized the senses. It would appear that rays of light might reach the eye, pass through the coats and humors on to the retina and the optic nerve, and yet no object be seen if the movement did not go on to the local center of sight. Seeing is not in the eye, but in the brain. Each sense gives its own sensation and perception. If the optic nerve is struck, light may be emitted. If the auditory, a sound is heard. But one sense cannot be made to give the impression produced by another. Great aid is imparted to all the senses by motion. This was dwelt upon by Aristotle, and has since been noticed by nearly all physiologists. Were the eyeballs motionless, our knowledge of objects would be attained much more slowly, and would be much more confined. We get a great increase of information by moving our sense organs, our eyes, our nostrils, or ears, so as to catch different impressions. We would have a very vague idea both of space and time without locomotion. Section 5. Organic Affections. Those of the nerves of the internal organs of the body, such as the stomach, the alimentary canal, and the viscera, also of the physiological acts of respiration, digestion, breathing, and circulation, and specially of temperature, which though intimately allied to feeling is yet separate, may first be considered. Each of these furnishes a peculiar sensation. The feelings from the whole are very numerous and very varied, and may constitute a considerable portion of human pleasure or human suffering. Such is the comfort produced by our bodily wants being supplied by air and water and food, and the stimulating cheerfulness arising from perfect bodily health. Such are the nervous affections, painful or pleasant, exciting or dull, irritating or soothing, depressing or elevating, and the uneasiness or pain coming from a diseased bodily frame. In all such affections, the main element is sensation, but mingled with it, though often very faint, is a perception of the part affected. This is not of any object, extra-organic. We may, however, by experience and reasoning, come to know that this pain proceeds from a wound produced by a blow or from an unhealthy atmosphere. But the original perception is only of an affection of our body of which we know the direction and, in a loose way, the locality. But upon these simple original perceptions we may rear a body of acquired ones. We may come to know, for example, what kinds of food and air derange our systems, and what kinds stimulate or strengthen us. The affections of which I have been speaking constitute a sort of general sense, which seems to be strong in some of the lower animals. Section 6. Taste. Its seat is in the upper surface of the tongue, which is covered with papillae of different kinds, and is supplied with two nerves, the glossopharyngeal and the gustatory, a branch of the fifth pair. The matter affecting the tongue must be in a liquid state in order to its being felt. Taste is affected by mechanical means, as by irritating the root of the tongue. Many seeming tastes may be regarded as smells, e.g., an onion and an apple, if the nose be closed, cannot be distinguished from each other by taste. The sensations furnished are considerably diversified and cannot be classified very accurately or properly designated as they run into each other. Some are keen and some insipid, some sweet and some bitter, some luscious and some acrid. In this sense, the sensation is far more powerful than the perception. Still, the perception is always present. We have a vague knowledge of the taste being in our mouth and in a certain relative direction. Acting on the principle of causation, we seek for a cause of the sensation, and by observation we may find it to be some kind of meat or drink, and by a gathered experience determine what kind of food it is. Some have acquired a great delicacy in distinguishing the qualities of such articles as wine and tea, but there is no evidence that by this sense we know originally and intuitively anything beyond our frame. The knowledge is of objects extra-mental, but not extra-organic. Section 7. Smell. Its organ is the nose, and the sensibility is in the mucous membrane lining the upper part of the interior and cavities which branch from it. It has a special pair of nerves, or rather processes of the brain, the olfactory. An olfactory lobe of the brain proceeds to the region above each nostril and sends down olfactory nerves into the upper part of the nostril. These nerves supply rod-shaped epithelial cells, some wide, some narrow. The lower part of the nostrils is supplied by nerves of common sensation from a branch of the fifth or great trigeminal nerve. The matter affecting the nostrils must always be in a gaseous state, and is called odor. Odors are so varied that we have not specific names for them. We speak of them as sweet, fresh, ethereal, stimulating, and malodors as acrid, nauseous, disgusting. Smell is closely connected with taste. Both seem to be combined in flavor. Often, by combining the two, we have to determine the nature and state, whether sound or corrupt, of the food presented to us. Smell always contains perception, a perception of our nostrils as affected, but the sensations are always more predominant. All that we know immediately by this sense seems to be our affected organism. If the odor is unknown, we have no idea of the object from which it comes. The senses of taste and smell are the most animal of the senses. Yet smell is capable of imparting a considerable amount of information, especially of direction. Some of the lower animals seem to be guided in their movements by this sense. By it, the dog will follow the track of game or of its master, or that which it has gone over itself previously with wonderful accuracy. As we ascend the scale of animals, this sense seems to lose its importance and its acuteness. But by it, our acquired perceptions carry us a considerable distance beyond our bodily frame, and open us to a wider world than taste does. Smell and taste are supposed to have their centers not easily distinguishable in the subiculum cornu ammonis. Section 8. Hearing. In this sense we have both sensation and perception in about the same proportion, though sometimes the sensation is the stronger, as in music, and sometimes the perception, as when we are listening to the words of a speaker. It gives, primarily, a knowledge of our ears as affected, but by a combined experience we perceive objects at a distance, and know that this sound proceeds from the human voice, this other from a drum, or from the wind agitating the trees, or from a running stream. The organ of hearing is the ear collecting the sound. The middle ear or tympanum with its bones or muscles, and the internal ear or labyrinth presenting a spiral shell called the cochlea, and the semicircular canals and containing a clear liquid. The matter affecting the organism is in a state of vibration. Going in by the external ear, the vibrations strike a membrane, the tympanum, and are transmitted to a chain of bones. The stirrup bone communicates beats to the opening of the labyrinth and compresses the liquid, and this affects the auditory nerve, which carries on the action to the brain. Each bag of the labyrinth is filled with fluid and floats in fluid. It contains mobile ear stones that beat like pebbles on the ciliated epithelium, which is richly supplied with nerves. The semicircular canals are engaged in maintaining our equilibrium. Through them, rapid rotation of the body causes vertigo. Auditory sensations are more delicate and agreeable than those furnished by any of the other senses, and differ in intensity, in quantity, and in tone. The melodies and harmonies of music stir up emotion, and by their continuance, trains of emotional thought. The ear can appreciate very nice differences of sound, and the intellect is roused to interpret the articulate sounds of the human voice. The fibers of Corti are situated in the cochlea. They are said to have 6,000 inner and 4,500 outer rods, and there are adjoining hair cells well supplied with nerves. They are usually supposed to be organs of music, and every tone affects a proper key of Corti's fibers. It seems certain that they somehow give the appreciation of sounds. They enable us to distinguish intensity of sounds and differences in time. End of section 4.